Warning: this podcast features adult subject matter, adult language, and things not meant for children to hear. Viewer discretion is advised. You've been warned. Welcome back, tubers, to another episode of the I'm No Joe podcast, the show where every armchair quarterback can feel like an Eddie Bravo. So today, just like last time, the crew is on hiatus, so we are running this shit solo. Did not want to miss out on getting you guys a quick little video here because it has been a minute. I've been ill. I've had some injuries, so it's been a minute since we had an episode out. So I wanted to take a quick little minute here, do a quick little rundown. I've got a bunch of news and events, and then we've got this weekend's UFC Stockholm card that we're going to talk about. Unfortunately, they have filled that card with a lot of filler fights, so there is only a couple fights on that card that we're going to take a minute to talk about here. But I did want to get some of this out before the fights actually kick off, so that way we've got this on record and you fine folks have something to enjoy yourselves with. So without further ado, we're going to start right off at the top where we generally start with the news and recent events here. We have got a metric fuck ton of fights that have been announced in the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks since I have done a video with you guys here. So we're just going to start right at the top and we're just going to start running these down here. So the first one I want to talk about real quick. I don't agree with this match, but there aren't really a lot of options as far as that division goes. Germaine de Randamie versus Aspen Ladd for UFC Sacramento, July 13th. I feel like Germaine de Randamie is not getting the respect she deserves because she ducked Cyborg that second time, and I feel like Aspen Ladd's being pushed too quickly. She's not as good as people are claiming she is. There's way too much hype versus talent there, and I think that's just a bad matchup. But moving along here, the next fight that they have announced this week that will be on that same Sacramento card on July 13th, the return from retirement, Uriah fucking Faber versus the meanest mullet in the West, Ricky Simone. Now, this is a bad fight for multiple reasons. Uriah Faber needs to keep his fucking ass out of the octagon. His prime was over long before he left the UFC. And I understand that he's still doing submission grappling, but he just got his ass kicked by 15-year-old Nicky Ryan. You're clearly not in the best shape of your fucking life, not in grappling, not in fighting. You're past your fucking prime, Uriah. Don't do this to yourself. It's going to be bad. And honestly, if he decides that he is going to go ahead and go forward with this, I hope Ricky Simone knocks him the fuck out because Uriah Faber has turned into quite a bitch over the last couple of years. And maybe he just needs a reality check with someone's fist outside of the Team Alpha Male camp. And I think Ricky Simone can absolutely fucking do that. So moving along from there, the next fight that was announced this week, Renato Moicano versus the Korean Zombie for UFC Greenville, June 22nd, so just a couple weeks away. That's going to be a fucking spectacular fight. Quick announcement here for the folks who have not found out yet. At last week's UFC event, Rashad Evans was inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame, which is spectacular because that dude is fucking amazing. He absolutely fucking deserves it. I was very glad to see it. And they did it the way that they've done a lot of the more recent ones where they catch you at the event. They don't say shit. They just start that little video highlight of your career, and then it rolls out from there. And it was nice. Excuse me. So, moving right along, back to more fights. The next one here. It's going to be an interesting one. And I called this one, and people told me I was fucking crazy for it. But God damn it, I was right. The UFC agreed with me. Max Holloway versus Frankie Edgar for the 145 belt at UFC 240, July 27th, the end of next month. That's going to be a good fight. And I don't think Frankie stands a fucking chance. I love Frankie Edgar, but I don't think he stands a chance, or anyone else really, from taking that 145 belt away from Max. But Frankie's also getting up there in the years, and he deserves a shot at that 145 belt, so let him have his shot. When Max pieces him up just like he did to Ortega, we'll all feel bad for Frankie, and we'll, again, come to talk about how Max is the baddest 145er that there is. And then Max is going to talk about going back to 155 again. So, we've seen this situation play out. We're going to watch it play out again, but what are you going to do? The next fight I want to talk about here. I will be excited if this fight actually comes to fruition, but due to the people involved, it is highly likely that it will never actually make it to the fight because one of these individuals has been booked, I believe, in 3 fights since the last time. No, maybe 4 since the last time he was in the octagon and hasn't made it to a single one of them and doesn't care. What I'm talking about is UFC 241, August 17th, Showtime Anthony Pettis versus Nate Diaz at 170. There's bad blood there, and I would love to see Showtime get a chance to expose Nate for what he really is, and that's punk ass. But I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think Diaz will ever actually commit to that fight because Nate Diaz has decided that he's not going to fight, but he likes the publicity of his name being the headlines, which is why he originally accepted the fight with Dustin Poirier and then backed out. And then Dustin called the injury and said that he wasn't going to fight. But do your fucking homework here. Nate Diaz pulled out of that fight before that fight ever got to the point where Dustin considered pulling out of it because of his injury. Nate Diaz pulled out because Dana wouldn't make it for the 165 belt because there's no 165 division, and Nate is fucking delusional. So if this fight makes it to fruition, it will be interesting. But I don't think Nate's dumbass will actually make it all the way to the fucking fight and show up. So we'll have to monitor that one here. The next fight we are going to talk about real quick, I believe is a terrible matchup, not for the people involved stylistically, but because of the way that they're doing this. We're talking about Donald Cowboy Cerrone versus Tony Ferguson at UFC 238 next week, June 8th. So it has pretty much been explicitly unspoken that the winner of this fight gets the next title shot after Dustin versus Khabib. That is absolutely infuriating because Tony Ferguson, while I love his fucking style, has been out of the octagon for over a year. I believe it's 18 months total, aside from the Pettis fight, which is a fucking bad joke, rather. Tony's coming off of injuries. He's coming off of a mental breakdown. He is not the number one contender anymore and has not been for over a year. Cowboy, on the other hand, just came off of a fucking spectacular victory over Al Iaquinta, who arguably was and still should be, in my opinion, the number one contender over Dustin fucking Poirier. Let that 145 replay at 145. Dustin doesn't fucking deserve to unify the belt. He doesn't deserve to have the interim around his fucking waist. Him and Max should not have fought for the interim belt. That position, the next title shot, belonged to Al Iaquinta. With Al being beaten by Cowboy, that shot belongs to Cowboy. Fuck Dustin Poirier. He's not going to beat Khabib, and he shouldn't have that fucking belt around his waist. He shouldn't be in the position that he is. It pisses me off that the UFC have let this WWE-style bullshit get to the point where it's at. Cowboy should be fighting for the belt, period. Cowboy is the top of the fucking heap in 155. The fact that they keep dragging Tony along and pretending he's still at the fucking top is absolutely infuriating. There's no fucking reason he shouldn't have to take a tune-up fight like every other fucking fighter coming in off an injury does. This is bullshit. But they're going to make him fucking do it. And, you know, I honestly hope that Ferguson loses, because if Cowboy loses and they push him back down the ranks after the fucking roll that he has been on in 2019 since his son was born, really, the fans should fucking riot and burn this fucking company to the ground between the ESPN Plus bullshit, the pay-per-view bullshit, and Cowboy continuously getting fucking pushed back despite beating everyone they throw at him and earning his goddamn title shot. And now them dragging Tony back up like he's still fucking relevant when he hasn't been in almost 2 fucking years. It's infuriating the way that the UFC is behaving right now. And I hope, honestly, that Cowboy kicks the shit out of Tony so they push him back down the fucking line where he goddamn belongs. Give Cowboy his fucking title shot. They're probably not going to, because they don't do things that are logical like we've shown in the past. But moving along. The next fight we're going to be talking about here, the Battle of the Juice Heads, and now neither one of them can deny it. Yoel, Soldier of God Romero versus Paul Costa. Paul Costa is coming off of a USADA suspension for steroids. Yoel Romero just won his lawsuit, which we'll be talking about in just a moment here, against the supplement company for tainted supplements, in which he tested positive for steroids. So there's an excuse on both sides, but they both have had steroids, and you can tell by looking at both of these clownish individuals here. This is a fight that has to happen for freak of freak's sake, but neither one of them deserve to be in the rankings at this point. Yoel Romero is 42 and has lost to everyone in the top 3, I believe, top 5, maybe, in the last couple of years, has had multiple chances at the belt and failed every fucking time. Stop it. Get his fucking juiced up 73-year-old Cuban ass out of the fucking ring. His time has passed. Costa is clearly on every Mexican supplement you can get into his fucking body, and the dude has no skill as a fighter. Send him to fucking Ryzen. Send him to ONE FC. One of the two. I don't care. He doesn't belong in the fucking UFC. And now he's tested positive for steroids. Fuck this guy, okay? Let Yoel beat him. Let Yoel retire. Let Costa go to fucking Ryzen or ONE FC. One of the two. And my nose is getting stuffy, so I apologize in advance, but here we go. Moving right along. The next fight, also going to be prospectively at UFC 241 on August 17th. The rematch that has been long overdue. The only fight that ever should have been considered is finally being made. DC versus Stipe 2 is getting run back for the belt. There never should have been a mention of Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar never had any intention of coming back to the UFC. Daniel Cormier used the thought of Brock Lesnar as an excuse to not give Stipe rather the rematch that he so fucking clearly deserves. Stipe set the goddamn record for most heavyweight title defenses. DC landed one lucky shot coming off of a clinch and tries to play this whole I'm the double champ bullshit. Fuck all the way off. DC is a bitch, period. His accomplishments mean absolutely dick when you look at them in the grander schemes ever since he's been in the UFC. Sure, he's had some entertaining fights, but none of them mean a fucking thing because of the issues going on with him and Jones and then the issues going on with him and Stipe. So, fuck DC. He has zero of my respect, and if he has your respect, I'm sorry about your luck. Maybe you should look a little more into the fighting world here. That being said, fuck DC. We're going to move on to the next one we're going to talk about here. This one's going to be interesting, to say the least. This is scheduled for the UFC 239 card on July 6th, and that is Claudia Gadelha versus Randa Markos. That's an interesting situation because, as we've talked about before, Randa Markos is one of the most inconsistent women in the UFC. One time she's great, the next time she's fucking horrible. So there's no way to tell which Randa Markos is going to show up. But she has been showing up in the positive side much more lately than the alternative here, and she's starting to get a little bit of momentum behind her, whereas Claudia Gadelha, who was once top of the stack, fought Joanna, was the #1 title contender, is starting to lose some steam and starting to drop her way back down the rankings. So we'll see where that gets us here. One thing I want to talk about that I probably should have moved up the list here now that I look at it was 2 weeks ago now, Cowboy versus Al Iaquinta. It wasn't an easy fight for Cowboy, but it wasn't that difficult of a fight either. You can see, based on what Al did to Khabib, and I know this is going to be a little bit of MMA math, but hear me out. Based on what Al did to Khabib on 24 hours notice, then turning around looking at full camp Al against Cowboy here, looking at what Cowboy did to full camp Al, there's very little doubt in my mind that Cowboy can and will, if given the shot, fuck Khabib up. Throw that perfect record right out the goddamn window and take the fucking belt. He deserves it. He should get his shot. He beat the guy that arguably came the closest to beating Khabib so far, and he did it handily. He barely had a mark on his face, and Al got fucked up in that fight. So that's part of the reason why it pisses me off so much that they're dragging Ferguson up like he's still relevant. Like, I get it that he was the #1 contender 2.5 years ago. The fucking division moved on. He needs to as well. Going on from there, though, speaking of moving on in a strange fashion, last week, Elias Theodorou and Derek Brunson fought. Derek Brunson beat him, 3rd round decision. The UFC cut Elias Theodorou after just one fucking loss. Elias Theodorou has been a staple on the UFC roster for quite some time now. Always puts on a very entertaining fight. The fact that they cut him after this loss shows me that the UFC is absolutely moving towards this WWE style bullshit more than they are legitimately keeping earned fighters, I guess we'll say here, on their roster, because Elias Theodorou earned his fucking way to the UFC, earned his ability to stay in the UFC, and the UFC is neglecting him as a fighter by letting him go after this situation, in my opinion. So, moving along from there, a little more recap here. Jose Aldo, the king of Rio, got his ass beat definitively and discernibly by Alexander Volkanovski. Volkanovski is quickly jetting to the top of the stack at 145, but despite his fucking mouth flapping like happens so often, he is not the number one contender for that belt. He has no right to make a claim over Frankie fucking Edgar. He still has a lot of fucking work to do before he gets to the actual belt in 145, in my opinion. He's making this claim off of beating the guy who's been beaten twice easily by the number one guy. That's not how this works. Sorry. I like Volkanovski, but he's not fucking ready, and he needs to fucking stop bumping his gums and make himself look stupid about it. So, moving along. I feel Anderson Silva should get another fight before he retires. He should get a fight that he chooses. He is a fucking legend. You fucked him out of his last fight at home in Brazil against Cannonier, where he ended up getting injured. Give him the fight he wants. Let him fight Nick Diaz. Let him fight Conor McGregor. Let him fight someone he fucking chooses so he can retire the way that he wants to. The fact that the UFC is willing to, event after event, nominate gentlemen into the UFC Hall of Fame who helped make this sport, yet continuously disrespect Anderson Silva, is unfucking believable. It's unacceptable. But it's unbelievable that they would even consider treating such a living legend the way that they are here. We don't know if they're going to give him another fight. He says he wants another fight. He's not done yet. Excuse me. Moving along from there. I'm sure the world has seen by now, but we're going to take just a second to talk about it again. Fucking poor Rose Namajunas. Fuck Jessica Andrade for bragging about winning that fight. She was getting the shit kicked out of her in every capacity by Rose, and then landed, I'll say it, I've said it before and I'll say it again, I don't give a fuck. The slam that Jessica Andrade used on Rose Namajunas is illegal in almost every other grappling sport. You can't do it in submission. You can't do it in fucking gi. You can't do it in no gi. You can't do that slam in wrestling, in fucking Greco-Roman wrestling. So why the fuck can she do that in the UFC and potentially almost break Rose's neck? Unacceptable. Fuck Jessica Andrade. She's a fucking fake champ, and the fact that she's bragging about that victory makes her even less respectable. Fuck her. On that same token, fuck Kevin Lee. Kevin Lee ran his mouth about how he was just in the wrong division and he needed to move up and he was going to do what needed to be done by going to 170 and fighting RDA. And RDA fucked that bitch up. Kevin Lee is all hype. He's done nothing but talk shit and not back it up against anyone qualified since he's been in the UFC. Fuck Kevin Lee. Moving along. This is the thing that I mentioned earlier that we're going to take a second to talk about here now. Yoel Romero, the Soldier of God, has officially won a $27.4 million lawsuit for tainted supplements against the company that he was taking when he got suspended for steroids. It has been confirmed the supplements he had were tainted. The company is now in serious shit, but something tells me that was not the only steroid in his fucking system, and it's not the only steroid he's ever taken. look at that goddamn freak and tell me he's all natural. Fuck all the way off. So, little different piece of news here, moving along. Anthony Joshua versus Joshua Ruiz is going on this weekend. While they're doing the press for this fight, Anthony Joshua is talking shit about Deontay Wilder after actively ducking Deontay Wilder for years. So, on one hand, I think this is going to be an interesting matchup as well because boxing is worth talking about on the highest level, at least. Excuse me. Can't stop yawning. Can't breathe out of my fucking nose. Hell of a show, I know it. But Anthony Joshua, I do believe, is going to beat Ruiz here. But I think realistically, honestly speaking, if Anthony Joshua stepped in the ring with either Deontay Wilder or Tyson Fury, he would get his face flattened. Joshua is not as good as he thinks he is. I understand. He was an Olympian. That doesn't mean dick in the real world now that he is not in the Olympics. This is not the Olympics we are talking about. This is the world of professional boxing. And in that world, there are two men that stand on top, only because it hasn't been officially decided yet. And that's Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder. And anyone who watched a fight intelligently will tell you Tyson Fury beat Deontay Wilder. So he should be the top of the stack, even though he technically is not right now. But give that time. I think that's going to come back. I think the rematch is going to happen. I think Tyson Fury is going to beat the shit out of Deontay Wilder, and he will be the undisputed king of the heavyweights in the modern era. That being said, my nose is stuffing up, so I'm going to try and hurry this up a little bit. Conor McGregor injured his left hand training. Hard training, they said. But according to everyone in Conor's camp and Conor himself, it's nothing major. It's being handled, and Conor's camp is saying that Conor is on track to be ready for a coming out of retirement fight sometime end of summer, beginning of fall. They just haven't announced who they're looking at prospectively yet. So Conor, while officially retired, is already talking about coming out of retirement, just like fucking Uriah. Conor never actually retired, I don't believe. I think that was just a promotional stunt because the UFC still won't give him a percentage of the fucking company, which, in my opinion, he has more than earned because we're still talking about Conor McGregor and he hasn't been in the ring in quite a while now. But the impact that he has made, the legacy that he has left, the path that he blazed through the UFC, he absolutely earned his right to a small percentage of that company, in my opinion. So, that being said, next piece of news here, one more fight announcement. I'm not happy about this, but I'm going to talk about it anyway because it needs to be mentioned. Former Invicta champion Felicia Spencer, who is a smoke show, has agreed to a bout at UFC 240 July 27th against Cyborg Santos. So, Cyborg Cyroids is clearly not getting that rematch against Amanda Nunes, which she wanted and no one else in the world does. She is taking a fight against and don't get me wrong, I get that Felicia Spencer is a former Invicta champion and she's in great shape. But compared to the monster, the deformity, the unflattering freak that is the juiced up fucking behemoth of Cyroids, Justina Cyborg Santos, I don't think this is a fair fight. They're literally keeping the entire 145 division around for less than a dozen ladies while they're trying to cancel actively the flyweight division on the men's side, where there are, I believe, 70 fighters, 60 fighters active, still trying to keep the division alive. They don't want the men's 125s, but they want the women's 145s when there's less than a dozen women who aren't fighting entertainingly at that weight. That seems a little fucking silly here. But last piece of news here actually pertains to the UFC Stockholm card, so we're going to mention that real quick. Ilir Latifi is officially out post weigh-ins with a last-minute back injury the day before the fights go down against Volkan Ozdemir. That sucks. Does not look like there's going to be a replacement found in time, so I feel sorry for Volkan more than anything. But that is your news and recent events. Moving right along to the UFC Stockholm card itself. Now, like I mentioned earlier, the UFC has done themselves a great disservice here. This card, top to bottom, is cram-packed with filler fights of either new fighters or old fighters or no one knows who the fuck they are fighters. This fight card in Stockholm with Gustafsson headlining had potential to be as big as any pay-per-view event has been this year. And UFC flat out dropped the fucking ball here. No short changing about it. The UFC dropped the ball on this card. This card could have been ridiculously stacked, like the 238 card is working out to be, or like the 241 card is working out to be. There are several cards during this summer that could have been changed around with this card. This card could have been great, and it does not look great. There is a lot of filler on here, so much so that we're talking about one fight on the prelim cards. Now, there's such a strange situation here because unlike every other card in 2019 so far, there's no early prelims for this card. There is just prelims and a main card. And there's so much filler all the way around that we're only going to talk about one fight on the prelims. So we're going to do that real quick. We're talking about Tanya, the zombie mom, Evinger versus Lina, I apologize. Lina, the elbow queen, Lansberg. Now, Tanya Evinger is really only known by UFC fans for being the unrelenting target practice for Cyborg when she fought Cyborg. She doesn't have a whole lot of skill. She doesn't have a whole lot of energy. She doesn't have a whole lot of pizzazz about her, period. And she's fighting Lina Lansberg, who is coming in just dropping dembos on everybody she gets a chance to here. So I think Lina Lansberg is going to take out Tanya Evinger, but I don't think it's going to be a stoppage. I think it's going all the way because Evinger is tough as nails. For the lack of technique and the lack of excitement she brings, that lady has a fucking chin. She can take some punishment. So I don't think Lansberg's going to stop her. I think she makes it all the way to the end. I think Lansberg wins by decision. We will see. I apologize. Give me a second. I got to blow my nose. I can't breathe. And I know that makes them for the most entertaining video, so I'm going to try and speed that up or something. We'll see how that goes. But moving along, that brings us to the main card because the rest of the fights on the prelims are not worth mentioning, honestly. First fight we're going to talk about on the main card, Daniel Teymur versus Sung Bin Jo. Now, Sung Bin Jo is another of the Asian prospects who definitely has some talent, has some potential, is, trying to make a name for himself. But the Teymur brothers are fucking ruthless. And I have zero doubt in my mind that Daniel Teymur is going to win this. But I'm not convinced he's going to get a stoppage here. I think he stands a good chance. I'm saying either late in the third or by decision, Teymur takes this one because he's just too active. He's too elusive. He moves too much. He stays too far out of what you expect him to do. And I think he's going to take this one. Next fight we're going to be talking about here. Marwan Amirkhani versus Chris Fishgold. These gentlemen don't like each other. They've gotten into it several times now. There was a pushing match at the original press conference, John Jones DC style. If you watch Ariel Helwani's show, he had Marwan Amirkhani on, and he talked about how he has basically changed his entire camp up. He's changed his style up. He's true to his original form, but he's changed his style a little bit. He's changed his camp a little bit. He's changed things up. He's changed his training methods. He is, for what he says, a different Amir Khani than we saw the last time in the Octagon, and a different Amir Khani than we're going to see the next time in the Octagon, because he wants to continue to grow and change his style and adapt more and become better. I think he does it. I Chris Fishgold is not an easy fight. The dude is yoked as fuck, and he's got some hands. He's got some skills, but I think Amir Khani just has that slighter edge if he really is a new version of himself. If he comes out with new techniques, with better style, with a little more fluidity to him, I think he takes Fishgold here. But if he comes out and it was all just a bunch of bullshit, it was all just fucking hype, and it's still the same Amir Khani, I think Fishgold puts him to sleep. But I don't think that's going to be the case. I think what we're going to see here is a new and improved Marquand, and I think we're going to see him take the W. Moving along from there. That brings us down to the co-main event of this evening with Latifi and Volkanovski out. Jimmy Manuwa versus Alexander Rakic. Now, I've been a fan of Manuwa's for a while now, but I think he is on the downward slope here. I think he struck hot when he first got here, but I think he is, for lack of a better term, been exposed. He was a huge fish in a small pond for a lot of years, but now that the UFC is the size that it is and the talent pool is as deep as it is, we're seeing that Jimmy Manuwa really isn't as great overall as he was in his previous years. Now, I'm not saying that's because he has completely lost a step, but you have noticeably seen that Jimmy Manuwa is not the same fighter now that he was when we first got him into the UFC. I think he's going to win this match against Rakic, but I think this one goes to decision as well. I don't think Manuwa has what it takes to get a powerful first-round knockout anymore. I'm not convinced he can get a second-round stoppage here. There is a chance that he could take this in the third if he can wear down Rakic. But I don't know that he personally has the gas tank to be able to do that. I think this one goes to the judges unimpressively, but I think Manuwa still gets the W here. That is going to bring us, though, to the main event of the evening. The headline of this card, the reason UFC Stockholm is in Stockholm, Alexander the Mauler Gustafsson versus Anthony Lionheart Smith. Both men just coming off of losses to John Jones for the title. This is basically to determine a number 2, number 3 contenders, number 1, number 2 contender, number 2, number 3 ranked spots in the 205 division right now. Even though we already know that John Jones is scheduled to fight Thiago Santos in his next title defense this summer. Again, that's another one of those matches. Thiago Santos is beyond overhyped, and he's going to get exposed by John Jones. That dude has got some lucky one-punch power, but there's also a lot of rumor, and by looking at him, it seems pretty fucking plausible that that gentleman is yoked the fuck out on all of the Mexican supplements that you can get your hands on as well. But aside from that, he doesn't have great technique. He doesn't have great skill. And I think John Jones fucks his world all kinds of up. But that's not what we're talking about right here. What we're talking about right now is Gus versus Lionheart. Now, Gustafsson has said multiple times over the last month or two that he just doesn't know if he still has the same fire that he once did, that the fights with John Jones have exposed to him that maybe he's not really where he thought he was style-wise and ranking-wise. And if Anthony Smith can beat him, then maybe he just doesn't have what it takes anymore and he's going to retire. That being said, over the last 48 hours or so, there has been a re-emergence, a resurgence of energy. A spark has been seemingly lit back within Alexander Gustafsson. He's excited again. He's convinced he's going to win this again. He's not overlooking Smith, but he thinks that he's got what it takes to get back in there again. He's also being realistic and saying that he doesn't see himself fighting John Jones again anytime soon for that trilogy fight, belt or not. But the fact that he's kind of snapped out of his funk a little bit, because he was very clearly in a funk after Jones beat him, shows to me that Gus still has a little urge down in the belly here, and he might bring it this weekend. That being said, if you look at the other side of this coin, Anthony Smith has internalized the loss against John Jones in the most self-deprecating manner you can imagine. He is looking down on himself. He is berating himself. He is punishing himself for the loss because he feels that he just never pulled the trigger, that he stood there against Jones and he fought, but he never actually went after it here. And he feels that in reminding himself and forcing himself to watch that Jones fight, in punishing himself, mentally and emotionally for letting himself lose to Jones in that manner, that he has pushed himself to the next tier, that he's brought himself to this point where he has no choice but to let go of everything he wanted to do against Jones, against Gustafsson here. I think, realistically speaking, round 2, Anthony Smith knocks Gustafsson out. Not because Gustafsson doesn't have the chin, not because Gustafsson doesn't want this fight, but because the loss to Jones has noticeably, visibly shaken Smith more than it has Gustafsson. Gustafsson has now lost to Jones twice, and both times kind of meh, said that he felt that he won them, but meh, no. Smith took his loss to Jones and he internalized it and he let it fuel him. And it seems like he is on the road to try and get back to the top of the stack here. Whereas Gus, I love Alexander Gustafsson, but I think realistically the best thing for him at this point would be retire from the UFC, open a gym in Stockholm, start training future fighters, because you've already been to the top of the stack twice in recent years and proven both times you're not going to be able to take it. You're not big enough to go up to heavyweight. You're too big to cut down to 185. Let's just be realistic here. Go out on a high note. You still have a great career ahead of you. You've definitely got Hall of Fame contention status, in my opinion, here. Hang the gloves up after this fight. Open a gym in Stockholm. Call it a fucking day. I think Anthony Smith wins this middle of the second, maybe late second. I don't think this fight sees a third round here. So, that being said, we're going to call it all for now. Hopefully we get some of the folks back on the next episode here, because everybody's schedule is insane right now thanks to the summertime. But thank you to everyone who tuned in this far. As always, if I have entertained you, if I have made you giggle with some of my predictions, with my nonsense that I have spieled, consider giving us a thumbs up. Maybe give us a subscribe. If you really dug it, give us a share so we can help grow the show. The other side of that coin, if you think I'm just an idiot talking into his fucking webcam, give me a thumbs down. I earned it. But that's all we've got for tonight. So we're going to call this all for now. Remember, don't let ignorance stop you. You can root for anything. Have a great night, folks.
Everybody was kung fu fighting. Those kids were fast as lightning. In fact, it was a little bit frightening, but they fought with expert timing. There were funky Chinamen from funky Chinatown. They were chopping them up, they were chopping them down. It's an ancient Chinese art, and everybody knew their part. From a fainting to a slip, and a kicking from the hip. Everybody was kung fu fighting.